Morning, all. Hey, Mike, how are you?
Good morning, Chris.
Hey, good morning. How are you guys?
Good, good.
Hey, before we get started, I'd like to thank the folks from NASCIO and the many state CIOs and their teams that took the time to fill out the survey that was sent out associated with this document that we produced with NASCIO. And then more importantly, there were about a dozen CIOs that participated in interviews that we'll listen to and hear about as we go through today's session. So thank you to all those that participated, and a special shout out to those folks from my former great state of North Carolina that are listening in today. Just by background, I did develop all these questions, and the panelists have seen them before we started this session. They'll each have 2 minutes to respond. No, that's another event I'm hosting, sorry. So as we get going here, so you had the chance to hear Dennis, thank you for the introductions of Mike and John. We're going to be starting off by recapping the NASCIO poll, and if we can jump to the next slide, please. So you might remember from earlier this week, we learned about the 2020 state CIO survey, and things are moving around a little bit on emerging technologies, and we took this opportunity in working with NASCIO to do a little deeper dive with the CIOs on these emerging technologies, and also found that there's some other ones that aren't as well represented in this slide, like blockchain and augmented analytics and other things. So we'll talk about that with our panelists today and what they're doing in their states. And if we can go to the next slide, we have a polling question for the audience. We thought it'd be great to give the audience an opportunity to start this session with a little interaction. These are the same questions that the CIOs were asked as part of the as part of their state CIO survey. So we'll give you a chance to answer those if you go to the polling section inside the app and answer the polling questions, and then we'll get our Crackerjack AV team to put those up on the screen once they feel like they've got enough polls in. In Utah, Mike, talk a little bit about how you see these technologies. Would you say your percentages match this, or were they a little different in Utah?
You know, that's a good question, Chris. First of all, when I took the poll just now, I voted for Woodford, so that was the poll that came up.
Oh, that's
for me.
The other poll. That's the poll. That's the later poll, Mike.
Oh, okay. Maybe I'm jumping ahead. So, no, I think you know, as we've been through the pandemic, we've seen a lot of challenges facing the state. It's interesting how chatbots, AI, kind of took the lion's share of the pie, and I think we'll continue to see that for the next little while. Excuse me. And certainly as you're trying to handle unemployment insurance and information dissemination via chatbots, that kind of thing, I think all of a sudden it opened the door for these types of technologies to enter into this arena. And all of a sudden, I think there's a lot of momentum behind them. And I think that's why they're the lion's share. I also see that states are trying to be more efficient, and you're trying to automate processes or go through streamlining some of the things that states are doing that sometimes are mundane or just repetitive. And so you can see RPAs are starting to make their way also. I think what we'll probably see, and that was a great video, Chris, that EY did, and I think you'll see some more things with IoT sensors, that kind of thing, and connected vehicles. I know it's a very small piece right now, but I think that is where certainly we'll start to see that take off. And in Utah, we're doing a lot of things with a smart vehicle corridor and allowing the V2I communication to occur, and really pushing on the gas, so to speak, in that area, so that we can make sure that we're out in front of the technology that's emerging here, and at the same time just getting things ready for the future. And I do see the timeline as 3 to 5 years, and I think that is within the timeline that we're looking at for some of the smart corridors to be much more robust, and to see more of the vehicles rolling off the assembly line that have the right technology built into the vehicles. And so, yeah, I think that is really going to grow rapidly over the next 3 to 5 years. But I think what the state CIO survey has has really captured here is what we're seeing here in Utah. So I see more of us doing more of these kinds of things, and certainly with the pandemic, we've learned a lot about where we're going and what got us here. Oh, there you go.
Wow. Okay, there's the poll coming back in. So, John, maybe you got a chance to study those poll results. It looks like they're evenly distributed, so we must have only had one person respond to all of them.
Or three.
Or three, yeah. Oh, here they are. They're starting to move now. So, John, maybe comment a little bit on these poll results as they're coming in kind of real time. This is like election night, so it appears that AI is still popping up at the top of the screen. But John, why don't you comment a little bit about as this ticker tape moves?
Sure, Chris, and good morning, Mike. Not surprising here. Some of the things we're working on in Pennsylvania are aligned with, the 61% that I see right now, primarily around virtual voice assistants, online chats, if you will. And we have different types in Pennsylvania. We have agent-based, and then we have machine-based kinds of chats. And then the idea that there is something about repetitive processes that need to be automated. I think that's what RPA stands for. We know it doesn't have anything to do with robots. and the reason I say that is each one of these kinds of emerging technologies requires some sort of ongoing care and feeding. We like to joke that AI is primarily artificial. And to make sure that we understand that as we continue down the path, that at some point we have to understand the application of the intelligence and how are we going to make sure that we as non-robots are learning from what's happening in this environment, right? So I can give you a couple of examples. Earlier this year, we ran an experiment primarily around unemployment compensation. It was a great opportunity for us to apply a virtual voice assistant. We were getting thousands and thousands of calls a day. And so we ran an experiment with one of the key partners and one of the conference organizers, and we learned a lot about what we needed to do to understand things like intents and, the intent of the question. If a caller comes in and asks you a particular type of question, is it similar to other questions, and is there a similar or singular response to that question? And the more we learn about those interactions, the more we were able to field different intents, different kinds of questions, and get callers the right answer more quickly. And we have some great knowledge to share on that if anybody's interested. From that experiment, what we did was we went to the next step. Part of our digital transformation includes this idea of a single phone number. Now, I think we all understand that that doesn't mean next Monday we're going to have one number for 12.8 million citizens in Pennsylvania to dial into. That's not what it means. It is a vision for a journey that will get us closer to that singular number. And when we can put, say, a virtual assistant in the front of that kind of interaction, we can then field callers to the right call center much more quickly without human intervention. So that's an application of an emerging technology that we're taking advantage of here in Pennsylvania.
That's a great example, John.
We're also working with autonomous vehicles. Some of you might know that Pittsburgh is a test bed, and we're working with different universities in Pennsylvania to expand the testing of these kinds of vehicles. And I will challenge everybody on the call to think about what happens when an autonomous vehicle comes to a state border.
What happens, John?
there's a traffic jam.
Yeah,
Part of
that's
what I'm trying to say is, like, this kind of technology has to become a national technology. It can't just be a unique occurrence within a state. As goods and services move across state borders, our systems, our Internet of Things, our road sensors have to be more integrated. So lots of problems to solve on the path or on the road to autonomous vehicles.
It's funny you mentioned that, John. Related to that is the COVID crisis. You know, we're seeing a lot of states that have large bordering cities concerned about how they share data across states because the coronavirus doesn't stop at the state border, just like the autonomous vehicle can't stop at the state border. So those are great examples. I'm going to transition now into some of the survey results. If we can flip the slide, please. I'll try to flip it too, but I don't think I have control. So as we're teeing up the next slide, that's the chatbot slide. We can go back to the deck, please. So in the survey, we were talking about emerging technology governance, and we had the chance to interview many of the CIOs and their teams. I know Terrence Wood, who is the CIO for Oregon, made an interesting comment. He says, having the Enterprise IT Governance Committee has really allowed us to make sure our folks are moving architecturally in a direction we want them to go. And I know, Mike, both you and John have similar enterprise IT governance committees, maybe under a different name. So, John, you want to talk a little bit about the framework that you're using in Pennsylvania?
Sure, Chris. A couple of years ago, we started evaluating a sort of industry standard enterprise architecture frameworks. And we settled on a customized version of the federal enterprise architecture framework. Since so many systems, at least in our Commonwealth, interact with federal systems, the idea of sharing a common architectural framework really got our interest. And so one of the things that we did, again, just to highlight the customization, is that we introduced a digital reference model. The app is built on this idea that there are reference models associated to different parts of the enterprise architecture. And I think the slide is trying to communicate that there are things like a performance reference model, where we can start to measure the results produced by individual business areas and programs. That there is a business reference model that covers things like different kinds of business capabilities, things like inspections or licensing. I'm sure many of you in the audience recognize those kinds of business capabilities. The underpinning data, or the data reference model, the applications that input, process, and of course store data and report on it, right? What's the capability in the reference model? This is the great thing about the app. It rarely talks about technology. It talks about capabilities. And when we get focused on capabilities, it helps us understand where our gaps are, and it helps us make decisions, and therefore governance, around where we want to improve our capabilities, whether it's technology or security, or again, in that customization, in that digital layer. Different kinds of things in digital space, like common identities across business services, so that when you're interacting with the state, you don't have to log out of one business service and log into another one, for example, with a different identity. So we feel that these two things together, a common enterprise architecture framework, coupled with a standards-based governance process, who has the decision rights to make certain kinds of decisions, supported by things like organizational units, committees that focus on the various aspects of the enterprise architecture framework, now allows us to have a common language and a common way of thinking about improving. Chris, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, John. So I know from the survey, about 30% of the states actually have a formal governance process for emerging technology. Mike, you're one of those states like John. I think yours is a cross-agency architectural review board. Maybe you can talk a little bit about mechanics of how that works and the value it's added to your state.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, John's got a very good framework that they've developed out there, and we've tried some things as well with, as you mentioned, Chris, our architectural review board, where anytime a new technology is coming into the state, and sometimes it's coming because of an agency has a desire to move forward on that. We have an architecture review board that it comes to, which is actually comprised of all of the IT directors for all of the state agencies. And it comes together and it's vetted, security vets it, we evaluate how well it integrates into our current technologies. It's really vetted in the open, and so that everyone can evaluate this emerging tech and does it fit, and does it have a play beyond what it's brought to the table for? Is there another option for this technology to really get a foothold in another agency? And so this architecture review board is part of it. We also evaluate things through our tab, what we call our tab, or technology advisory board, which is comprised of even folks from the private sector, higher ed, it's a very diverse group of individuals coming together to evaluate what we're moving on as well. So if it comes out of the ARB, a lot of times we'll throw it through the tab, and then we get this very nicely vetted solution before it actually hits the ground, and that really feels like, hey, we've really looked at every aspect of this, and like I said, looked at other plays for that technology. But probably the incubator for all of this is in our Center of Excellence for AI, where a lot of that happens, where we bring the private sector in with their technologies, and we bring all of the agencies together that might make these kinds of decisions. We bring them together and say, hey, these are the things that are coming out in the industry. Let's talk about it. And really, that's kind of the more the ideation that occurs, or the spitballing that occurs in that level. And that's really been tremendous for us to vet new technologies as well. So just to kind of get things to come up and percolate up. But yeah, it's really working well for us, and we're excited to see how it goes in the future too.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So on the slide that's on the screen, that was one of the next survey questions, was where emerging technology would make the most measurable impact. And I thought from our interviews, BJ Kumar, the CIO in Rhode Island, made an interesting comment. He said, there's no way government cannot do emerging technology when the citizens are so used to using it. So Mike, talk a little bit about Utah and the citizen facing digital services and some of the emerging technologies that you guys are looking at to improve the citizen interaction.
Well, I mean, it's really, I'm excited that came out number one, because that's really some of the things that we're focused on here, especially because of the pandemic. I keep going back to that. We're trying to find ways that those citizen-facing services that the state offers, can we refine that or tweak those so that there's less in-person interaction? It pays a lot of dividends for a number of reasons. I mean, you don't have to have buildings, you don't have to have packed lobbies with people that are going through a screening process, if they're sick. And so what's the alternative? Like John talked about having a single identity for all of their services. That's one of the things that, of course, we've been focused on for some time. And but now what's next for us? And so we're looking at things like having digital vehicle titles. That's one of our priorities right now for DMV, where they can say, hey, during the pandemic, we closed down all but 3 of our DMVs statewide, because only 3 of them had the ability for drive-up services. And so everything else was locked. And you can imagine the lines at those 3 DMVs that were remaining open. And so in our sampling of why people were coming in instead of doing a lot of these transactions online, we realized that we just had not offered some citizen-facing services that required them to come in person. And so vehicle titles is one of those that came out on top as to why people were coming into an office. And so I think you'll see that with us, that we're eyeing a potential solution that's on blockchain, but it is our number one solution right now to solve any of those in-person interactions and allow the citizen to conduct the transfer of title. All, the state will be notified, but beyond that, it can be conducted all outside of the state involvement, and you don't have to on the line, you don't have to come into a state facility. Really kind of trying to take advantage of some of the things that are out there. One of the things I thought was interesting in the video was the emergence of drones, and we're doing a lot more with drones. We are the recipient of fires coming from the west. We're getting a lot of that smoke here, and so we're looking at drones to measure air quality at different stratas, and we're looking at, there's a lot that goes into that, measuring the ozone, the particulates, those kinds of things. Most everything else was land-based, and now we're wanting to understand what the strata looks like at altitude, and how does that affect things. And so we're seeing a big play there for us, using these drones as emerging tech and measuring our air quality. So it's kind of exciting to all that goes with that, the streaming of data, the machine learning with the data. There's a lot of opportunities to kind of get excited about the new technologies. Again, it's out of necessity, though. I mean, we've had some very serious fires across our country, and the smoke and air quality has just been tragic. So we're trying to get out in front of those kinds of things before it gets away from us.
Great, thank you, Mike. So I know, John, it's kind of the other ranking item in this particular survey, right under citizen-facing services, was cybersecurity. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how Pennsylvania is leveraging emerging technology to make improvements in cybersecurity.
Sure, Chris. A big shout out to the Commonwealth team focused on cybersecurity. I think we were a finalist in the awards earlier this week, so very proud of what everybody is doing there. A couple of things that we're looking at in terms of cybersecurity is the application of things like log analysis and using analytics to determine how do we best combat threat vectors. So that's an example. And we're doing something that isn't necessarily emerging, Chris. We are working with cross-jurisdictional partners, MSISAC and counties in Pennsylvania, to implement new sensors on our Commonwealth network to make sure that things like election security is handled in a very consistent way. We're actually deploying those sensors as we speak. And we think that this is a really interesting model where we have a common service across jurisdictions, and that we are ingesting alerts and making sure that we're taking action as quickly as possible based on the events coming into our event and incident management infrastructure.
Got it. So we can get the team to switch to the next slide. Well, one of the other questions in the survey is what's one of the most significant challenges, and by far budget kind of came to the top. I know in our interview with John Hoffman, the CIO in Texas, he said the budget challenge is consuming a lot of our thoughts, and emerging technology can help if we can just justify it. So, John, maybe talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you see associated with the budget, and what you're doing to fund emerging technology capabilities.
So I think every new CIO understands that their best friend in terms of their success relies on the budget director in some form or another. Helping to forecast the cost of IT services and changes to business services is a key element of our role. One of the things that we did in Pennsylvania a couple of years ago was we established a shared services model, and core IT services are now shared amongst agencies here based upon that governance process that we established. When we look at a budget for emerging technology, we're looking at an experimentation approach. And what we're thinking is, the more experiments that we can do with emerging technologies, of course, protecting our citizens' data, making sure that our cyber security capabilities are kind of built in, is that there is a way to help justify the cost of that emerging technology based upon avoidance of future risk. We all frequently have to do various types of procurements. And so when emerging technologies or new capabilities are built into that procurement activity, we're essentially acknowledging that this risk exists. And by experimenting with emerging technology and having high degree of confidence that a particular solution, a particular technology integrates and fits in the context of our systems, it starts to reduce that risk. Couple that with this idea of your procurement code has to be able to support experimentation without the commitment to buy it. Now you bring in more partners and you start to look at maybe there is a real opportunity here. If I have, for example, a call center that requires 50 agents and I can deal with 20% of those calls with, say, a virtual voice assistant, now I'm either freeing up 20% of those call agents to do something else, or I can start to deploy those resources onto other things and avoid the need for additional budget requests elsewhere. So those are a couple of things that we're working on.
Great. Mike, in Utah, how are you guys dealing with budget and funding emerging technologies?
Yeah, and that's I think these challenges that you identified are spot on, and budget being the top one. I kind of enjoyed John, kind of saying, hey, yeah, this is the challenge here. And so we're trying a few things. First of all, if you can demonstrate the ROI and make that investment up front, sometimes it's not as difficult to get the money or the resources. So some of the things that we're doing is we have a small innovation fund in the state, which allows us to go after a project that will demonstrate an ROI, but it also has to be a multi-agency solution. And so it can't circumvent the typical budget process and the budget process going through the governor's office and then to the legislature. But oftentimes there's an agency that has resources, another agency that does not. And so they can apply to the innovation fund for resources to take advantage of an emerging tech that in the end will demonstrate some ROI, whether it being a citizen-facing service or even compressing the timeline on what it takes the state to offer a service, or even reducing the FTE count and create more rewarding jobs in the state because they're not doing these mundane or the RPAs that kind of like John was talking about earlier, that they can find some more rewarding work. And so I think that if you can demonstrate those, then that becomes a little less challenging, because you can demonstrate, hey, this is going to give us this kind of benefit. And then all of a sudden the stakeholders say, hey, this is where we want to make that investment. Even when budgets are lean, this is something that I think will open the door for us. And so we've had a little bit of success with our innovation fund. We're finding things that we can do that will pay dividends in other areas of the state. And it's starting to, as the story goes, success breeds success. You start to see these successful stories, and all of a sudden you see that additional success in other agencies throughout the state, and it does take a little of the challenge away, but it's still a challenge.
So on your innovation fund, Mike, I know many of the states might benefit from that. Is that budgeted at the governor/legislature level, or is it are you kind of taxing your services and peeling off a small percentage of your shared service revenue stream?
Yeah, it is actually an appropriated monies every year. It's there. It's this ongoing account that we know will be there. It's nice to have that constant revenue stream that you can always say, hey, this is how we're going to. and again, some of these advisory boards and the governance that we talked about earlier really figure out how to distribute that properly. And so it really gives the right focus for us going forward each year. But it's nice to just have that small amount of money there every year.
Yeah, I know, and many of the conversations kind of transitioning on the same slide, but one of the other challenges that came up a lot in the discussions, and I know Irvin Rogers mentioned from CIO of Ohio, mentioned that working with emerging technologies is helping to improve the citizen experience, but it's also helping them to attract many of the millennials to their team. So I see here lack of the necessary staff. I know, Mike, you're doing some work to help your staff with emerging technologies. Maybe you can talk about that. I think we have the next slide, if we could flip to that, while Mike talks a little bit about this project.
First of all, Irvin would be disappointed if I didn't say OH. So anyway, I know he probably
IO?
Yeah.
I'll complete it for you.
So yeah, so if we go to that next slide, we were trying to figure out creative, exciting ways to get some of our technologies integrated. Maybe it doesn't look like it's advancing yet, but maybe I could just start speaking. There it is. And so we created some. We wanted to have some fun. So we weren't having our March Madness, of course, this year, and so we came up with our Geek bracket challenge. And so what we did is we created basically an NC2A bracket, but with geeky kinds of things. So we had masked characters, big hair bands, sitcoms, and sandwiches. And oh yeah, there. So and then we had seatings. And every week we would have a roll for each round. We would have a dice roll to see how one seed would compete against a 16 seed, for instance. They would get extra dice, additional sided dice. And so we had a lot of fun, but what was really exciting was that we were trying to adopt a bunch of new technologies coming out, and we built this around some of those new techs. As you can see, this was I think this was our final roll, and people even dressed up for it. You can see we had a member of the KISS band show up in the lower image there. But we had a lot of fun coming together, talking about the roles, getting a disconnected office connected, and trying out new technologies. We built it all in AWS and GCP. A lot of the technologies that were there, a lot of new kinds of fun things. I'm trying to remember some of the things that we did. I want to say there's like the GCP Cloud Functions. We used a number of microservices. Of course, it was all cloud native. And we even used, as John mentioned earlier, we used our identity, our open identity, just for everyone to log in and create their own bracket. And so we just had a ton of fun with it. And at the same time, people were challenged on, how do I learn this new technology and integrate it into something like this? And so I'm sure ESPN is going to be knocking on our door to figure out all the technology that went into this, because it really was incredible. And you could get real-time updates on your brackets, just as as we would have these roles. What we did is a little hangout meet for each of the roles, and we would watch the roles, and it provided an opportunity for a few folks to talk smack. But unbelievably, a knuckle sandwich was one of the sandwiches that was in there. Went very far in the whole race. But just so you know, it came down to the finals, and it was grilled cheese against KISS was the final. And I think this is you can see that KISS showed up to be part of that role. But in the end, it was grilled cheese that prevailed, and we had a lot of fun doing it. So anyway, this was just kind of snapshots from our roles that we had throughout the week. But again, the technology that was going into that, and the excitement about seeing how to bring that technology to something like this, we just had a ton of fun doing it.
So that Mike, that when you say roles, just so the audience knows, I had the pleasure of talking to you about this earlier. They actually rolled dice, special dice, and that's how they want a bracket to move forward.
Right. So yeah, and it was all virtual dice, and so everybody dice rolling. So it might be a 20-sided dice or a 4-sided dice die, and you could see. And so you might have 6 or 7 die depending on how many, what seating you're at, and so you get to go through the whole process. And it was a ton of fun. We had a good time doing it. So, but yeah, thanks, Chris, for clarifying that.
That's great. That's a great story. So, if we can move to the next slide. Coming out of the report and working with the CIOs, there were kind of 7 action items to optimize emerging technology. I'm not going to read all 7 of these, but I'd like to just comment. I know Stephanie Dedman said that from the CIO from Tennessee, that emerging technology needs to add value, solve problems, and make things easier. So I'll start with you, John. Maybe talk, is any of these 7 kind of jump out at you that you'd like to talk about how you're doing that in the Commonwealth?
Yeah, I really like what the team in Utah has done to spark innovation and think about things like, how does a particular piece of new emerging technology fit in the context of what we're already doing? And just to support Stephanie's point, right? If we're going to do something with new emerging technology, we have to make the decision. That's a governance thing. You have to do it in the context of your architecture. You have to have the money. And of course, you have to have the procurement mechanisms to make that happen. I think that kind of supports what these 7 points are trying to say. We have to be able to understand the outcome of the application of technology and what value it delivers, not to IT. I talk often about IT is not in business for itself. IT is in the business of supporting our business stakeholders and meeting the needs of the residents and businesses in whatever state we work in. It's up to us to figure out how that technology, whether it's new, whether it offers value, whether it offers meaning, and we call that innovation in Pennsylvania. When those things work together, and we've been doing innovation for 60 years. You all have. In one way or another, when you're doing something new, whether it's an emerging technology or it's leveraging something that already exists, but you're applying it in a new way, you start to deliver different kinds of outcomes. If that trims a nickel and saves a dime, that's fantastic. But we have to remain focused on exactly what Stephanie said. It has to add value. It has to solve a problem. It has to make things easier, right? IT is a people business, not in and of itself a technology business. When things get easier and you need fewer skills of a certain type, that's great. You can use them for something else. That's all part of emerging technology and governance. Perspective.
Yeah, John, just to kind of, I do recall you mentioning the procurement waivers. Kind of tactically, could you share a little bit about how you actually did a procurement waiver and what that means? I know some of our corporate sponsors, I'm sure, would be interested in knowing what a procurement waiver is in the Commonwealth. Yeah,
so we have an established code. Are you ready for this? Written in 1929. And it has been modernized and innovated and updated based upon emerging technologies, emerging services, changes in the marketplace. But every now and then there's a policy or something that says you shouldn't do that. So we use a waiver process with the right governance around it to make sure that every now and then we are considering what we call a valid exception. And when we spot those things and say, well, wait a second, this might lead to something else, we're okay with providing a waiver. And look, there are some systems that were built on, I'm sure we've all heard that the mainframe is going away. It's a rumor. I'm pretty sure that somebody started it. I don't know who, right? But
I think
in my 35 years, never gone anywhere. But there are integrations of business processes that span different pieces of technology, the cloud, on-premise servers, mainframes of different types. And part of assessing a procurement waiver is understanding the context in which that particular technology, emerging or otherwise, needs to be applied. And through governance, sometimes you have to make a compromise. You have to say, we can let this go for a little while, so long as it conforms with our enterprise architecture and it's protecting our citizens' data. Those are big things that we're considering, right? So we use these waivers to help us understand, again, against our enterprise architecture, where our gaps might be. If you've got 100 waivers about a particular policy or a lack of a capability, it also helps you prioritize where your next investment ought to be. I hope that answers your question, Chris.
It did. That was helpful. Thank you. I know, Mike, kind of same question. You had the opportunity to speak about the Innovation Fund, which is very helpful. Is there other items on this list that kind of really ring true to what you're trying to accomplish in Utah?
Yeah, I mean, these 7 are just incredible. I think these capture the essence of a lot of times what we're trying to do. Because certainly to avoid the top-down approach to, where you have sometimes there's a lot of great ideas out there. How do you get those to the forefront and start working on them? Because a lot of times that's where the innovation really occurs is with those that are actually dealing with the problem. And kind of to John's point, you don't do it just for innovation's sake, but you're usually trying to solve a business problem. And so when you're reaching throughout the organization to say, hey, what are the challenges that exist here, and how do you bring technology or something in the industry? Now, you can't always do every shiny widget that comes into the front door and say, oh yeah, that's the solution. But that's where you start evaluating hey, we understand this business process and it's challenged here. How do we bring in emerging tech? And this idea may not be exactly right, but we have other ideas that do similar things that integrate better. So that's where you start to get the momentum. You just want those guardrails out there to provide the opportunity to bring those technologies forward, but not necessarily stifle everything that comes in. But certainly, and also I mentioned our Center of Excellence for AI. We are bringing in those vendor demonstrations and having all of the agencies participate in those where there may be an application for that technology. And that's really where you get a lot of the groundswell movement going, because there's opportunities to say, hey, if we just bring this one thing in the door, it has application, a broad application across many agencies. And so that's why I'm really excited to see that also made the list. But and the cross-agency pilot projects where you don't always know exactly how something's going to apply, what kind of technology may apply in some other area of the state. And certainly if we're finding new use cases for technology that's already in the front door, how to just leverage that somewhere else, because that investment has been made. You've upskilled your employees, you understand the technology, you understand what it takes to get that off the ground. You maybe even built infrastructure around it. Now that's how to apply it elsewhere. And so that's where it really starts to pay dividends without having to reinvest all of that time. So great 7 points here, and boy, I can't say enough good about them, but they're certainly what we're focused on here in Utah to make sure that we're doing it right.
That's great, thank you. So if we can go to the next slide, I'll give our panelists an opportunity to comment on this, but we are going to have a live poll. If you go to the polling feature inside the app, you can let us know which of these emerging bourbons that you've tried and you look forward to having tonight in the bourbon tasting this evening with all of your peers. So Mike, John, I don't know if either of you have had the pleasure of enjoying any of these bourbons, but I'll give each of you a comment to see. John's had 3 of them, okay. Mike?
No, I'm going with my Diet Coke right now, so that's
okay,
what I'm
Diet Coke, got it.
So a little early.
A bit early in Utah, is it?
Yeah, it's a little early out here still.
5 o'clock somewhere, Mike.
It looks like the polls are coming in. It looks like a pretty good distribution. The Hartfield and Company seems to be I think that's a small distillery that's not well distributed. So that, but I understand very good. So, and I think everyone's probably seen Woodford before, so that's great. And we obviously have only about 45% bourbon drinkers because nobody's tried the ones on the list, I guess. So anyway, well, that was just kind of a fun way to end the conference. I'd like to thank our panelists, John and Mike, for sharing your insight. It was great to hear what you guys are doing. Appreciate your involvement in helping create the report. Encourage everyone to go out to NASCIO.org, and it'll be published on the website today, and you can read the report at your leisures. Any final closing comments, Mike or John?
Nice job, John. Mike, Chris, and Dennis, and the entire NASCIO team, wherever they are.
Yeah, thanks. Very great discussion. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Dennis, we'll turn it back over to you, sir.
Well, thank you all. What a great discussion. I found that super interesting, and thank you so much. Chris, I want to thank EY and yourself for the great continued partnership. Super. It's fun to see you delivering excellence in your new role as you did in your previous role. So thank you so much for that. And Mike and John, hearing what you guys are doing and working on, particularly on the governance stuff and the leadership you're providing in your state, it's great to hear about it. It's great that you guys are leaders in your state. But also, I want to thank you for your national leadership in delivering the goods and helping us all figure out how we deal with this really important topic area in our jobs. I wanted to call out a couple things. One, 7 actions. It's great when a study gives you actionable results, and it's typical of the EY NASCIO partnership that we do get actionable results. And I'll end with my favorite 2 words from the session: procurement waivers. Thank you all again.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dennis.
Thanks for your leadership, Dennis.
If you'd like to discuss the session or ask related questions to your colleagues, head over to the hub and use the chat function on this agenda item. The deep dives related to today's theme are now live on demand in the hub. These sessions are Chatbots, sponsored by Avaya; Low-Code, No-Code Development, sponsored by CompuWare Corporation; CIO Perspective on AI and Automation, sponsored by IBM. Enjoy the sessions and related discussions this afternoon. I hope you'll join us for the closing session, What's on the Horizon and What's Not. The panel will talk about the future of state IT using a unique format that is sure to spur good discussion and lots of audience engagement. Enjoy the day, and I'll see you again at 4 p.m. for the closing session.